Hi there, this is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, and welcome to part 3 of Kurosawa Before Rashomon. Today we're going to talk about Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 from 1945, which again I have on this early Kurosawa BFI DVD set. It's also in a Criterion Eclipse set. I believe it's in the AK-25 Criterion DVD set, which hopefully at some point will be upgraded to Blu-ray. This is a sequel to Kurosawa's debut, strangely enough called Sanshiro Sugata, and every actor and character pretty much returns, with a notable exception. It's the first Kurosawa film that doesn't have Takashi Shimura in it. It stars Denshiro Okochi, again as Sanshiro Sugata, the famous judo exponent. He's so famous that the children sing songs about him and his reputation precedes him. So the action opens up, he comes back after leaving on a train at the end of the first film. So he's back, he helps a rickshaw driver who's being abused by an American sailor, and he ends up throwing the American sailor in the water. And judo has, in part thanks to Sanshiro Sugata, has taken over from Jiu-Jitsu, well, not taken over, but certainly has gained in reputation. And there's karate groups that don't like judo as well. The film opens, he gets invited by a Japanese consulate worker to see a fight between an American boxer and somebody performing judo, which he is against because it makes a mockery of Japanese martial arts, and the guy who is performing the Japanese martial arts gets beaten up badly by the American boxer. Sanshiro's disgusted by this. He goes back to the dojo, so the leader of the dojos in this film, the same actor, the hilarious philosophical priest, is back for the sequel, giving pearls of wisdom, but Sugata is more disillusioned. This film has a greater sense of melancholy about the first one. The first one had, kind of excitement and a joie de vivre about it. This one is more melancholy. The brothers of the Hijaki brothers, from the character in the first film that was defeated in the duel by Sanshiro Sugata at the end of the film. His brothers turn up in their karate exponents. It's quite a wonderful, startling scene as they come into the dojo. One of them is fairly wild with wild hair. Is actually the actor who plays Jin Itsuki from the first film. He plays one of the brothers in the second film as well. He suffers from seizures, and there's kind of light that comes in through the windows at the top of the dojo, and it's just beautifully shot. As this character is tearing up the place and pulling bits of wood off the walls, because he's so upset and he wants a duel, not surprisingly, with Sanshiro Sugata after what happened to his brother. But the rules of the dojo are, you know, you don't drink alcohol, you don't eat and drink, you don't disrespect, you don't have duels, you don't do fights for entertainment. All of which is obviously challenged by Sanshiro during the course of the film. He ends up having a bout with the boxer. There's a moving scene where he meets the character who was beaten up by the boxer in the opening scenes of the film, and he ends up meeting the defeated Hijacky brother from the first film, who has kind of changed his life, but then he's become sick, so he's a shadow of his former self. In the original film, he's well suited and booted, and a bow tie and bowler hat and a bristling black moustache. In this film, he's a defeated man who's ill, and then you have these two fairly psychotic brothers who want to avenge him. And it follows the same kind of formula as the first film, and it ends with a duel in the snow this time, as opposed to a windswept grass field in moonlight. And again, there's wonderful images, but I will say about this BFI print on DVD, at times it's almost unwatchable. The duel in the snow is just terrible in this print. I hope one day we do see a Blu-ray of this film, because it is beautifully shot in comparison to The Most Beautiful, his second film, which is fairly flatly shot. You know, it's a propaganda film, there's not a lot of technique on show, whereas this one uses montage and dissolves and jump cuts. It's much more of a director's film than The Most Beautiful, which again is a fairly flat, plain piece of filmmaking. But the print on this BFI set is really not very good at all. Lots of grain, and again the duel in the snow is almost ruined, quite honestly. But again, you have the trademark compositions and framing, especially, you know, in the architecture of the dojo, etc., just lends itself to compositional framing, the way that the factory in The Most Beautiful didn't really lend itself to wonderful compositions. Like I said, this film is a lot more subdued, more melancholy. There's obviously this overhanging thing of the difference between American culture and Japanese culture, the difference between American fighting and Japanese fighting, the difference between judo and karate, judo and jiu-jitsu. So there's all these elements kind of clashing. Personally, I don't think this is as good as the first one. It's solid. Again, if it was a better print, I think it would be a lot better. But the quality of the BFI print is not very good at all, I have to say. So it's an interesting start from Kurosawa. You could put his kind of beginnings of his career similar to Bergman. Bergman's is probably better as far as the start of his career, but Kurosawa, you've got a truncated debut feature which is still good but was cut by the powers that be. Then you have a not that interesting propaganda film, and then you have a sequel for his third film. So not the greatest of starts. He himself says out of his first 10 films before Rashomon, it wasn't until about the 7th film where he actually got his feet and kind of was starting to grow into his milieu. But Sanshiro Sugata and Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 are both worth seeing. You could almost watch them back to back just as one film. The fact that helps that it's the same characters from the first film, it's the same actors from the first film. Takashi Shimura's character's daughter, who was not necessarily the romantic lead in the first film, she's just sidelined very quickly. I think she's only in it for like one scene. It's not really about that, it's about the revenge of these two brothers, plus the clash between fighting for, you know, the spiritual level and also for entertainment, and that clash between that Japanese culture and American culture clash, or sports as entertainment as opposed to something higher than that. So it's a good solid little film. Both Sanshiro Sugata films are, but these are not great films. You know, when we talk about Kurosawa, you know, these aren't the films that we mentioned. But again, that's why I wanted to do this series, these 10 films before Rashomon, because they're not really mentioned. I mean, to be honest, I think if you asked most Kurosawa fans what's your favourite Kurosawa film, Rashomon's probably not their favourite film. But Rashomon is such an important film as far as it kind of kicked the door down to the West actually being exposed to Japanese cinema. So obviously you had lots of people in the 20s and 30s and 40s making films in Japan, but it wasn't until Rashomon came along in the West was kind of made aware of there's this great cinema going on. But I think it's interesting, it's always interesting to see, you know, an artist's career arc, especially a great artist in my opinion, or Kurosawa, you know, how that arc starts. You know, very much like Bergman. Bergman didn't explode onto the scene with masterpiece after masterpiece. It took him some time as well. There's obviously people like Orson Welles who exploded onto the scene with Citizen Kane, and you could argue, certainly in a critical and box office level, kind of went downhill after that, not artistically. So I just think Kurosawa before Rashomon's something that people don't really talk about, and it's really quite interesting. But hopefully we get better prints than are on this BFI set. Please let me know if you have the Eclipse Criterion set, what the prints are like, or if you're lucky enough to have the AK-25 DVD set from Criterion, what the prints are like on that. But certainly Sanshiro Sugata Part 2 could really do with a Blu-ray upgrade, because like I said, for me the beautiful Jewel in the Snow is almost kind of ruined by the print because it's really quite bad. So on that bombshell, I'll leave you for part 3 of Kurosawa before Rashomon. Please let me know if you've seen Sanshiro Sugata Part 2, what you thought of it, and hopefully you'll join me for part 4. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying cheerio.